Right. So, hi everyone. It's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Philip Newall. Philip is a lecturer here at the School of Psychological Science in Bristol. He completed a PhD in economics at the University of Stirling in 2016 before going to postdoctoral research at the Technical University in Munich, the University of Warwick, and at the Central Queensland University. Philip has a range of interests across gambling research, and today he's going to talk to us about the evaluation of the Take Time to Think, Safer Gambling message. Philip, it's all yours. Thank you.
Thanks, Almog. Yeah, it's great to talk to you all today. I had wanted to do another piece of work that I thought might be sort of a bit closer methodologically to what you do in the lab, sort of a big online text mining kind of exercise. Unfortunately, that just didn't come together in time, so I'm presenting you this work instead. And this work is, yeah, sort of very stereotypical for me. I guess it's, evaluating a sort of real world policy to look at what kind of effect it might have on gambling behavior, but to try and hopefully make things a bit more sort of directed towards you guys. I have done a one-slide intro to you on why I think online gambling might be relevant to some of your key themes in the lab. So online gambling is now considered the most harmful form of gambling. It just exceeds electronic gambling machines, which are the other most harmful form of gambling. Principal reasons for this are that online gambling is continuous. You can do it at any time of day and from any location as well with mobile gambling. And basically the continuous forms of gambling are generally considered to be the most harmful. And the UK has the largest regulated online gambling market in the world. And so here on the right is a very interesting book by Peter Adams called Gambling, Freedom and Democracy. And basically it's a very interesting take on how gambling affects gamblers and people in their lives, and how the gambling industry is sustained by various other actors in our political system. So the first key thing about gambling is gambling sector, like other for-profit sectors, tries to make as much profit as it can. But the trouble is that this profit leads to harm. So their profit equals gamblers' losses, and the more money that gamblers lose, on average, the larger harms they experience. And the trouble is that numerous stakeholders become co-opted by these gambling profits. So governments gain from the gambling status quo via taxation. Oftentimes, the gambling industry expands in time when the government is trying to make more money through taxation. So this is a key reason perhaps why the national lottery was introduced in the UK in the early 90s. And as soon as the national lottery became a thing, other forms of gambling then sort of lobbied for further liberalization, and the government agreed because they wanted to get more taxation revenue. But also politicians themselves can directly become co-opted by the gambling industry. So a lot of MPs in the Conservative Party get money paid for them by the gambling industry. So for example, Philip Davies gets taken on many all expenses paid days out by the gambling industry. And Tom Watson, formerly the deputy leader of the Labour Party, is an interesting example. So when Tom Watson was in the Labour Party, he campaigned for further restrictions on gambling to reduce the industry's profits and reduce harm, hopefully. But after the last general election, he lost his seat. And very interestingly, the first job that he took after losing his seat was, of course, he started working for Paddy Power, because all of his connections that he had in Westminster were very valuable to the gambling industry, and they wanted to pay him so they can sort of directly lobby politicians to further weaken new legislation. But also the media can become co-opted by gambling profits. So for example, News Corp, so newspapers and TV, they can profit a lot from gambling advertising, and this gives them an incentive not to sort of help in this war to restrict gambling. They are profiting from the liberalized gambling market that we have. But also this can happen in the charitable sector. So gambling industry firms, they'll often sort of give money to charities in the guise of corporate social responsibility. But giving money to charities actually makes the charities dependent on further gambling profits. And so the charities then have an incentive in these debates about what to do about gambling. They actually have this incentive to lobby against further harm reduction. Also, certain gambling harm prevention groups can be directly funded by industry. So for example, Gamble Aware and GamCare in the UK are two charities that do various things to reduce gambling harms, but they're actually funded by the industry. So they have these perverse incentives to focus on individual level causes of gambling harm rather than systemic causes, which are driven by the gambling industry. They have this incentive to focus on people, what is wrong with the people who get harmed by gambling, rather than looking at the system itself. Also, researchers can get funded by the industry and have these perverse incentives. So, getting funded by the industry is something that looks good in your CV. You've got all this funding money coming in, but also gambling industry funded researchers get other advantages. So they get access to good behavioral data sets of online gambling behavior, and they can use this to publish a lot of papers, whereas independent researchers such as myself don't get access to this data. And there are a lot of debates in gambling which sort of like very importantly come down to the state of the evidence. So for example, around gambling advertising, there's a lot of gambling advertising, but it's sort of made, the onus is placed on researchers to show definitive proof of causal proof that gambling advertising leads to harm. The industry doesn't have to prove itself in order to support the status quo. It's for some reason always placed on researchers to find like absolutely very strong evidence that what's happening is leading to harm. And this can be difficult when we don't have access to these behavioral data sets. And we have to rely oftentimes on retrospective self-report data. And of course, you can suggest something via that form of data, but you're not showing causal evidence. And this is oftentimes something that really holds the debate back. So researchers got a really key contribution to when it comes to reducing gambling-related harm. Sorry, one thing that I did mean to say at the beginning is do please ask questions throughout. I like to clarify things sort of as soon as I can if anything's not clear enough. And there should also be plenty of time for discussion as well, I hope. So take time to think is kind of the current safer gambling message that the industry has. But this is actually a new one which replaced their former message. So their former safer gambling message was one that told people that when the fun stops, stop. And this is very prominently displayed, this message. So for example, here I have an example of a gambling shop window where we have 3 instances of the message shown. In the bottom left, I actually have, this is a screen grab from a Premier League football match. So where they were actually showing this message on billboards around the ground. And then here in the bottom right, I have an example of the message that's shown on TV. And the reason why they came up with this message is that starting around 2014, there was a lot of sort of public awareness about gambling advertising, just how frequent it was, especially around sport. And, a lot of politicians saw this and were like, not sure if this is right. And so anytime there's a debate, the industry tries to prevent direct government action by doing their own self-regulation. So instead of like government mandated warning labels, they'll come out with their own message, which they'll put everywhere. And one thing that is very striking to me about this message is how it's perhaps not the most serious message. So it's meant to be educating people about the potential harms of gambling. But one interesting thing about it is they've made the word fun much larger than any other message, than any other word in the gambling message. And oftentimes when this message is shown on TV, it's often flashed for just, like less than a second, sometimes it comes up. And when it's shown, especially in this very short displays, basically the only word that you see is fun. So they're meant to be educating people about gambling harm, but actually they're just telling people, they got this implicit message, if you will, that gambling is fun. So the study that I'm talking today is building on some previous work that I have. This previous work was the only independent test of when the fun stops, testing its effect on gambling behavior. So I'll give you a brief overview of how that research worked, which will also follow on to this current research. So it's an online experiment. Basically, what we do is we give people some bonus money, and then we give them some gambling option to gamble that bonus money. They don't have to gamble it if they don't want to, but if they do want to gamble, they can gamble as much or as little as they want. The gambling situation that we give them is this commercial online roulette game. So it's a fully sophisticated online roulette game where we got the source code and implemented it into an online experiment. And then what we did is between participants, we either showed them this safer gambling message when the fun stops, or we didn't. And we compared between groups if there was any differences in their gambling behavior. This is another screenshot of the task. And when they put the money in, they spin, they show this spinning wheel. It was really quite realistic compared to a lot of other gambling research. And our key finding, as it was reported in the press, is that this message had a null effect on gambling behavior. It didn't help people to gamble less money when they were showing this message. This is examples of press coverage in the Guardian and Daily Mail. They're sort of describing it just kind of as we mostly wrote it as a null effect. But actually, all of our individual experiments, the trend in every single one of them was trending towards a backfire. So there was a trend where people actually gambled slightly more on average when one fun stop was shown to them. In one of our experiments, this trend reached the pre-registered 95% threshold. You know, I do this research to hopefully have some sort of impact on gambling policy and regulation, and this is probably the single study that I've done that's had the most impact to date. Now, saying that, I do find it a little bit silly, I guess, what that actual impact was. So here we have the key version of the message before our study. So you can see here again, they're making the word fun very prominent, which is something that we definitely picked up on in our study. And then interestingly, somewhat shortly after, I started to see some gambling industry actors who use this new version of the message. So you can see here, they've subtly reduced the size of the word fun. So, you know, that's great impact for my study. I got them to reduce the size of the word fun in safer gambling messages. And nowadays, the most impressive impact for my study so far is they've even got safer gambling messages now which don't mention the word fun at all, which is really big, significant impact. So moving on to this new message, take time to think. You know, we're independent researchers and we don't like to have too strong a priori hypotheses. We want to think, you know, what are the pros and cons of this new message? So pro number one is, yeah, a really good one. It doesn't include the word fun. Good job, guys. But it does actually have some potential face validity. So high frequency gambling is the type of gambling that's very strongly associated with harm. So the message does have some sort of potential credibility. You know, if you can literally get people to take time to think in these high frequency gambling formats, you know, they might gamble less and they might then experience less harm. This is something that we're going to look at in our study. Does the showing of the message take time to think literally make people take time to think when they're engaging in this roulette game? The answer all will be revealed soon enough. But the message also has some cons. So a lot of, you know, harm prevention in gambling, a lot of the discourse has been about a personal responsibility narrative. So it's all about what's wrong with you individual gamblers, and it doesn't really talk about the systemic drivers of harm. You know, the gambling industry always trying to get more profit, coming up with new forms of gambling that have the potential to be highly addictive. And then another con is it's still kind of vague about what gamblers should actually do. You know, it doesn't say, like, you know, gamble for no more than 10 minutes at a time. You know, it doesn't say like, you know, take a break every now and then, only take this much money, set a deposit limit. It doesn't say that, it's still very vague. So, you know, it would be nice to have a safer gambling message that's a bit clearer about what you should actually do. You know, like smoking, warning labels are very clear, you know, like about what exactly happens with smoking.
But, you know, if you mentioned like the smoking labels, because that was always like in the background for me when you in this talk, and I was wondering like what is really like the effect of smoking labels? Is that something that like the gambling industry should I mean, is that the sort of intervention they would like, and if so, like how effective is this?
Yeah, so tobacco researchers generally think that graphic warning labels especially can be quite effective at helping people quit. They still have like sort of you know, some sort of perverse effects that oftentimes very heavy smokers, they try and actively avoid the graphic warning labels. They do everything they can not to see them. In gambling, yeah, I mean, it's one of our conclusions that I'll perhaps talk about a bit more in the end. I think that, you know, stronger warning labels are something that could be potentially helpful. You do have a lot of specific issues with gambling. In particular, one thing is that gambling related harm, it's a lot harder for people to think about than, you know, smoking causes cancer. Yeah. It's a lot more diffuse, and individual gamblers, they only tend to experience a few of the harms. And, you know, it's very diffuse in terms of like, there's lots of ways a gambler can get harmed. You know, they lose money, but then also it can affect sleep, it can affect jobs, it can affect their relationships with their family, all these different things. And it's, you know, any one gambler might only experience a few, even though they're a very heavy gambler. And so it is definitely still a tough nut that we haven't fully cracked, like what would be the perfect safer gambling message. But yeah, that's maybe something that I want to look at more in the future. It is kind of surprisingly hard, especially like when you talk to like, you know, people like gambling counselors. Oftentimes they hate a lot of the ideas that we come up with for better, safer gambling messages.
Thanks.
Okay, so our aims in this research is similar to the previous work on When the Fun Stops, to perform a strong test for the message's effects on contemporaneous behaviors in an online experiment. As done previously, we've got a large sample size, pre-registered the study, and we use real incentives to measure the effect on gambling behavior. We increased the real incentives slightly from the previous study. The previous study, we gave people £3 each. So here we give them £5 each. So it's a bit more, it's a bit closer to the average stake in online gambling. But we also wanted to improve some things compared to the previous study. So one thing that we do is we manipulate message prominence. So the previous study, it did have a very prominent warning label while they were gambling, and the warning label was also shown on the screen before when they were explained how the roulette game worked. But it's still possible that, you know, maybe some people don't see it. And so we have a new condition in this experiment called the message plus condition, where we make the warning label as in participants' faces as possible. It's shown as a big pop-up immediately before the roulette game. They actually have to close the pop-up before they can continue. And there's research, other gambling research suggesting pop-up messages are the most effective form of message, and also the best time to show a gambling message is immediately before people gamble. So like a sort of just-in-time message. So this is to basically give the message every sort of potential chance that it can do to be effective. And then secondly, we also measure a broader range of behaviors. So the previous study, I'll get into the specific measure in the previous study a bit more quite soon. So we're basically looking at how much money people gamble compared to the total amount that they could have gambled. But there are other behaviors that a safer gambling message could potentially influence. So the first one that we look at is, you know, I think very related to the content of the message. So we're looking at speed of play. So this is the total number of seconds between any two spins on the roulette game. We remove data here for the first spin, because the first spin, they're sort of just getting used to it. But then, so for anyone who spins at least 2 times, we look at the average number of seconds between their spins. Next, we have a measure of help seeking. So we have a page immediately after the roulette game where we give them information about this online information and support provision website called GamCare. We give them the opportunity to very simply go to the GamCare website. We measure rates of this between the different conditions. And finally, we look at the number of bets made. So, maybe the message does get people to slow down, but if they're still making the same number of bets as when they're not shown the message, then actually the only thing that's really happening is they're gambling the same amount, but actually taking up even more time in their gambling. And, loss of time is definitely one of the things that gambling, it's definitely one of the ways that gambling can harm people. The more time you spend gambling, the less time you have for other things in your life. So a bit more about the method. We recruited UK-based online gamblers from Prolific. The total N who were randomized to condition was 2,305. So we had a really good, per cell sample size here because we had 3 experimental conditions. Participants were paid £2.50 each and recruited for an optional roulette game. So we were very explicit, I think, that they didn't have to gamble. They didn't want to. So they earned their £5 bonus for the roulette game by performing a boring task. This is what's called a real effort task in economics, and it's thought to better approximate gambling with one's own money than gambling with some money that an experimenter has just given you. So obviously, one limitation on external validity that we have here is we can't get people to gamble with their own money. So this is something that we do to try and minimize the lack of realism from getting them to gamble with money that we've just given them. So as soon as they got given the bonus, they were given instructions on how the roulette game worked. And this is where the message manipulation started. So even before they get to the roulette game, they're either shown the safer gambling message or not. And then the roulette game starts. And if they want, they can just click forward and end the experiment very soon if they want. But if they want to gamble, they can gamble as much as they want. So we actually had a really wide range in terms of engagement with the roulette game. So the minimum was 0 and the maximum was 198. Overall, 25.4% of participants do not gamble at all. And one of the things that we do in our proportion bet analysis is we look at different ways that the gambling message could conceivably affect their gambling behavior. And so their option to not gamble at all happens after they've been randomized to condition. So we can see, does the message affect this initial choice whether to gamble or not? Does it affect their choice to gamble as much money, gamble all the money that they have and lose it all? Yeah, it's quite a neat analysis that we did. That there's more details in the preprint if you're interested in looking at that. And yeah, so there was also a wide range of bonus payouts. So bonus payouts between 0 and £79.40. So I'll just show you a bit more of the roulette game, how it actually looked. So yeah, very similar to the previous study in terms of how the roulette game looked. Here have an example from the message condition where they're showing the message throughout as before. This is an example of what we call the message plus condition. So in this condition, they're showing the message throughout, as in the message condition in the previous study. But then they get this additional pop-up message immediately before the gambling. So this is really giving the message as much opportunity as it can, and we're measuring as many different gambling behaviors as we can. So the outcomes, here again, there are 4 in total. So the first one, proportion of available funds bet. So we wanted to make the gambling situation as realistic as possible. So the outcomes were fully random, as in real roulette, with a 2.7% house edge. So if you gamble, on average, you'll get slightly less back than you gambled with on average, but you do have the opportunity to potentially win more. So we need a measure of sort of gambling expenditure or gambling engagement that can in some way account for this randomness. And this is our measure, which we call proportion bet. So the numerator is the total amount of money that they bet throughout. And the key thing is they get given £5, but if they win money, they can gamble those winnings as well. So in theory, if you win a lot, you can, and you want to keep on gambling with it, you can gamble way more than £5 in total. So that's how much they actually bet. and then the denominator is how much money they could gamble if they gambled completely to extinction. So if they gamble their initial stake and all their winnings and they lose everything. So this is equal to £5 plus all of their winnings. And so this is a fraction between 0 and 1. So it's 0 for the 25.4% of people who gamble nothing at all. And it goes up to 1 for those people who bet and lose everything. And the reason why we do this is because we think there's a key difference, right, between someone who gambles £5, loses it all and exits with 0, versus someone who gambles £5 but breaks even on their bets and finishes the experiment with £5 bonus. The reason is that the second person, they kind of gambled less than they could do. They had the opportunity to gamble more, but they sort of showed some restraint. And this is reflected in our proportion bet measure, which a more simple measure, just like total amount bet, would not reflect. Now, our next outcome, speed of play. It's just the total number of seconds between any two clicks on the spin button, excluding their time until the first spin. Third outcome, it's a very simple one, the total number of spins. And the fourth one is this yes/no variable, whether they clicked for their help service information immediately after the roulette game. And so there's a whole range of gambling behaviors that we look at. Here's what the gambling information screen looked like. So we basically copied the GamCare home screen as best we could. Let me say, do you want to open this tab, yes or no? Okay, I'll just give you a very brief overview on the analysis. There's a lot more in the preprint. My collaborator, Henrik Singman, was the person who led on the analysis on this study. And yeah, he did a really great job, much better than I would have been able to do myself. So there's a Bayesian analysis in R. Our inference was based on 95% credibility intervals. And here I'm just going to give you an example of the proportion bet DV. Like, so this first panel here in the top left, this is the empirical distribution. So you can see here that there's spikes at 0 and spikes at 1. So spikes at 0 is people who just take the money and run. Spike at 1 is people who lose everything. And you can see here in between, there's this sort of roughly sort of like equal uniform distribution of people who are gambling some proportion. And we fit this very complicated 0-1 inflated beta regression model to reflect the distribution of this outcome. And here in the other panels, we've got simulations from the model showing how the model was well able to capture this distribution of responses. So here we're going to move on to results. This first one, proportion bet. So this is yeah, the one measure that we had in our previous study on when the fun stops. So in all of these graphs, on the left, we've got the means and 95% credibility intervals for the 3 conditions. So here at the bottom, you see no message condition. The mean proportion bet is about 35%. And then we've got the message condition and the message plus condition. You can see both of them. There's this roughly 2% reduction in proportion bet. They're at about 33%. And in order to see if these differences are credible, we've got the graph on the right, which helps. So here, we've got the difference between the 2 treatment conditions and the control condition. So we've got here 0, and if the 95%, if any 95% credibility interval doesn't overlap with 0, then we've got a credible effect. And so you can see here that although we've got this 2% reduction in proportion bet in the 2 message conditions, it's not quite meeting our pre-registered threshold. So Henrik gets very mad at me in terms of like actual ways of describing it, but some potential maybe if you collected a much larger sample, you could see some effect here, but as yet we're not able to conclude that there's a credible effect on proportion bet.
So what was your prior, like what did you think that the intervention will cause?
Yeah, so I mean, I think we said it could go either way. You know, we didn't make a directional prediction. Obviously, we saw in the previous study that there was a trend towards a backfire effect. However, the face validity of this message is better. So that does give you some potential that, there could start to be a protective effect with this better message. But yeah, we didn't make a strong directional prediction one way or another.
Okay, so pretty wide priors, I assume.
Sorry?
Pretty wide priors then, I assume.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of like the Bayesian side of things, there's a lot in the paper. It's the modeling is definitely that Henrik did is definitely a bit beyond my level. It's Bayesian, but he still really doesn't like Bayes factors. So I tried to talk to him about Bayes factors once, and he got very angry at me. So
I'm familiar with the Bayesian perspective that really discounts Bayes factors. So.
Yeah, so this is a slightly different Bayesian approach based on 95% credibility intervals, which is a bit frequentist in terms of like the inference, sort of yes, no kind of thing. But yeah, the finer points are, somewhat beyond. He does argue that this Bayesian approach is better able to deal with these complex models than a frequentist approach. So even though it's got some bits that are a bit more similar to a frequentist approach than a Bayes factor analysis, it's got some advantages as well. Okay, so here's my second outcome, speed of play. So remember, this is my the big one that I led up to. So the question, does telling people very prominently take time to think, does it literally make people literally take time to think when it comes to playing this online roulette game, which is really quite a high frequency form of gambling, because you can, in theory, bet once every 10 to 15 seconds, which is a lot faster than a, say, conventional bet on the lottery or something, which has a speed of, once a week or twice a week or something like that. So here we've got, again, the same graphs. This is a very different pattern. So in the previous outcome, there's a consistent pattern across both the message plus and message conditions. Here it's different. Here, the only thing that seems to have anything going on at all is the message plus condition. And here people are roughly maybe half a second slower on average compared to the no message. But again, this effect does not reach our pre-registered threshold. So again, we can't conclude that there's a protective effect here. And also in terms of, if you're making these sort of like, sub-significant, sub-credible sort of trend type looking things, interestingly, there's only an effect in one of the two conditions. Now it is in the condition that we would think to have the biggest effect, right? We thought that if there's a difference between the two message conditions, it's likely that the message plus condition is better. So I guess, like, again, still some sort of potential, but we're not seeing clear-cut evidence that the message is being particularly effective. So here is our third outcome, total number of spins. So again, it's good to, less spins is better here. And yeah, we see again, looking on the right, we see no credible effects, right? The zero line is intersecting with both the credibility intervals. Interestingly, we see like almost the complete reverse as with speed of play. So here, message plus and no message are bang on exactly the same average number of spins. And if there's any trend here, it's in the message condition. So the message condition, there's around 0.5 fewer spins compared to the no message control. But again, it's not reaching our threshold. And again, it's not consistent with the previous outcomes. There's yeah, we're not seeing similar across the two message conditions, and the larger trend here is actually in the message condition that we thought would be the least effective of the two. Now, finally, I'm going to give you my clicks for help service information. Here, the base rate of clicks was actually really quite low, so only slightly over 2% of participants in each condition wanted to do this click, which in my view slightly reduced the power of this analysis. Had some arguments with Henrik here, but in my mind, it would be a more informative analysis if you had a higher base rate and no message condition. Nonetheless, there's absolutely nothing here that both of the message conditions are sort of bang on zero. So, okay. Sorry, have you got a question? No, okay. So yeah, my summary, no credible effects anywhere that we look on them. In proportion bet, there's at least a sort of a trend towards a 2% reduction across both of the message conditions. But only the message plus condition has a protective trend for speed of play, and only the message condition has a protective trend for total number of spins. The fourth outcome didn't really show too much. So that's not great, but there are some positive interpretations. So although largely ineffective, it's probably still better than what they had before, as in that previous research, the trends were all going towards a backfire effect. So great job, guys. You're no longer actively harming gamblers via your safer gambling messaging, but you're also not really helping them positively either. But on the more positive side, it does suggest that even better safer gambling messages, perhaps ones that are designed by independent researchers and not designed by industry, could provide something, if they give people slightly more concrete guidance on what to do. And yeah, I mean, there is another interpretation, of course, to all of this research, is that just maybe these online experiments, maybe you just can't show anything. Maybe it's too unlike real world gambling that you've just got no effect on people's behavior, and that's why you're finding nulls everywhere. Counter to this interpretation, I do have another study using the same roulette game, though which had a different safer gambling intervention. So in this game, in that other roulette game, we slowed down the online roulette wheel, because online roulette is a lot faster than in casino roulette, because the game can play faster when it's completely electronic, when it's not, based on real things happening in the world. So we had a study that manipulated speed of play, where in one condition we slowed down the online roulette game to the speed of its in-person equivalent with a live dealer. And there we actually saw credible effects on two of the same outcomes that we have here, proportion bet and total number of spins, suggesting that there is some potential that you can find credible effects in this kind of online gambling research. So overall, our conclusion is that a public health approach to reducing gambling harms, which is what the whole buzzword that everyone in gambling has, and it's always in the news, and it's what the regulator says, and everyone says that they want. And by public health, we mean kind of treating it a bit more like smoking. A public health approach should contain numerous interventions, of which further improved messaging could be just one small part. And that's everything that I have for you today. So thanks a lot for your attention. And yeah, we've got a little bit of time left if you've got any questions.
Thanks, Philip. Yeah, I see Simon already raised his hand.
Okay, yeah, I can't see the chat. Okay, I can see it now. So yeah, Simon.
So first of all, thanks very much, Philip. That was very interesting, and also obviously incredibly valuable work. So thank you very much. I asked this question really as devil's advocate, which is there an argument for saying that the messages, particularly the first message, when the fun stops, are actually kind of longer term messages than you're giving them a chance to.
Yeah.
That one in particular sounds more like, if your life is going in the wrong direction, that's when you stop to think, rather than that this would happen during the case of a 1 minute or 5 minute game.
Yeah, that's very true. But you know, it could be the case that it's sort of downstream behaviors rather than contemporaneous behaviors. And it could be the case that, you know, you have to show the message multiple times in order for it to be effective. You could also argue that because we had UK gamblers, it could be the case that they've already seen these messages so often that the messages have already reached their maximum level of effectiveness. Yeah, look, these are all arguments that we can't, like, you know, directly address in the work that we've done so far. I think all of them come up with a lot of the limitations that you have in gambling research, in that, you know, as an independent researcher who doesn't have access to real world gambling data, right? Like, the way to show this would be to have like access to a gambling industry's online account of all the behavior of what a user has done. And in theory, they could also keep track of how many times they've shown these messages to gamblers and see, you know, they could do a field study to see, like, does it actually help? Now, the thing is, the gambling industry will never do that, right? Because
Well,
they'll only, sorry?
well, unless you legislate, but they have to.
Yes, but the trouble that we have is politicians won't legislate unless there's gold standard evidence to show that, you know, whatever is causing harm, right? So we're kind of trapped in a circularity in terms of we can't get gold standard evidence at the moment because we don't have access to those tools, to that data, to those studies that we want to run. And not having access to that stops us from, you know, being able to do, like, get anything to change based on the studies that we do. So it's a very, very sort of, you know, difficult, like, I'm not sure how you square that circle really. And that's definitely one of the key themes going through my research. This, yeah, sort of tricky, you know, game theoretic situation you end up getting put in. Gambling industry are definitely expert players in this game.
Yeah. If I can ask another question, Phil, I mean, yeah, very interesting data and you know, interesting methodologies. And I'm wondering if you thought of personalizing the message based on the user's behavior, because
yeah,
at the moment, you know, this is just a blanket kind of, you know, start thinking message. But it seems to me that the problem are not people who, you know, spend £1 or something online and then occasionally win something and they feel entertained, perhaps. The problem are people who, you know, gamble away lots of money. And I wonder what would happen if you custom designed a message so it pops up saying, look, you have been gambling for whatever 100 spins, you've lost 80% of everything you've been given. Don't you think it might be time to quit? Something like that. Has anybody looked at messages based on performance or loss records?
There's been a couple of studies like that. One run by a UK researcher who's funded by the industry. There's been some stuff in Norway, actually. So in Norway, they've got a slightly better setup. They've got a state monopoly, and the state is the one who controls. They've got data on basically gambling spend for everyone who engages with the state monopoly. So the state monopoly is in a slightly better position to run these sort of field studies. And both of those have shown effects. I think the Norway field study with the government showed better effects than the industry funded with an industry funded researcher. Yeah, I mean, there's always the potential for better messages. I definitely have an idea in the pipeline that's maybe less about expenditure and a bit more about the different types of people that are out there, because, you know, gambling has certain demographic correlates, but it can also affect people from all walks of life. So, you know, and the motivations for, say, like a widow who's gambling a lot, you know, just sort of like out of boredom and loneliness, her motivations and sort of potential reasons to stop might be very different from, say, you know, an 18-year-old male who got into it from his friendship group, and you know, he gambles kind of because he's young males are one of the highest at-risk groups, and especially if they've got high levels of impulsivity. So these are very different people, and yeah, I kind of wanted to try something a bit more than sort of like, you've lost lots of money, this is bad. In theory, it'd be good to sort of message them before they've lost all the money, because kind of loss chasing and things can be one of the problematic behaviors.
Of course, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, also I'm just getting sick and tired of messaging. My great impact of getting them to take the word fun out of gambling messages, like it's I would hope to have some bigger impact down the road, and that's one reason why I look at things like characteristics of the games themselves, because I think you can get stronger effects there.
Yeah.
I think Nisim has his hand up.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to ask you, what are your thoughts on the mode and the source of the gamble awareness message? Sometimes you see these adverts, right? And they'll be promoting their gambling website or their game for 2 minutes, and then they'll slap the message right at the end. And I always find it interesting, the person they choose to deliver the message. It's like normally like an East End guy, right? Like a thick East End accent, like, please gamble responsibly. And all that. So I wonder what you think, what impact the mode and the source of the delivery of the gambling awareness message and when it's delivered has on people.
Yeah, so that's an interesting one. I think the advertising campaign you're alluding to is Bet365. So yeah, they've got Ray Winston, who's an East End bloke, and that was actually one of the first gambling advertising campaigns in the UK. So we actually didn't have gambling advertising before 2007, but the sector got deregulated by New Labour, and that was one of the first ones that came out. And at first, like he would show odds, like so they show it at halftime in a football match, and he'd show odds on like bet, if this player scores in this next in the second half, 5-1 or whatever. And yeah, it's interesting how this message is this campaign has stayed very much similar throughout time, but there's been some small subtle changes in it. So he used to say bet and play now. But the Advertising Standards Authority had this new guidance that came out, and they said that gambling advertising campaigns can't create an inappropriate sense of impulsiveness and urgency in their gambling. So now he doesn't say bet and play now, but he still shows you the odds on what will happen in the next second half. And I've seen in my previous research really like bad examples where the odds that they show is sort of like a team to score in the next 10 minutes or something, which is really quite a sort of impulsive and urgent bet for them to show. But the only thing the advertising standards cared about was the bet and play near. So now he doesn't say that, but everything the rest is the same. And now it's only since like a few years ago that's when he started to say at the end, bet responsibly. And yeah, it's complete rubbish. It's I don't think any of these messages really have effect. Maybe if like some like stereotypical scientist in a white coat came out and said it, maybe that would be a bit more effective. I don't think anyone's done that. And I think definitely his like gamble responsibly kind of thing is kind of just like the sort of fig leaf, so that they can say in debates in Parliament that they're taking safer gambling so seriously, and in the last few years they've stepped up their safer gambling messaging campaign. And yeah, of course they don't want to do something that will be actually effective, because that would reduce their profits. They just want to do something that will give them an excuse to say you shouldn't regulate us more.
Yeah, it's interesting because especially with YouTubers now, I see a lot of YouTubers who are being sponsored by gambling companies. Like Stake is a big one now. So they'll get behind young YouTubers, and before like a big boxing match or a big UFC fight, they'll bet their parlay. They'll like all they have to do is post their parlays and stuff on their Instagram story. And it's interesting to me how they're just allowed to go for younger audiences like that without any complications.
Yeah, I mean, the online marketing space is definitely a huge shit show. Stake.com are completely horrendous. They're actually mainly a crypto gambling operator. So you can gamble in just like normal money with them, but their main thing is crypto gambling. So you can deposit like 0.1 Bitcoin and gamble in your 0.1 Bitcoin. I've got other research just showing that they've got just these sites are rife with consumer protection flaws. And yeah, the advertising through Twitch and YouTube, Twitter, so underregulated. Oftentimes they use these sort of like humor type things so that people will retweet what is essentially a gambling advert because it's like banter or whatever. Yeah, we've got really very little awareness of these more hidden forms of marketing. Obviously, politicians, they get quite concerned often with gambling advertising in football because they watch football and they see it and they're like, this is horrendous. But there's this just like huge iceberg below the surface of, yeah, these more modern forms of media, marketing through them. Definitely, there's so much scope to do these sort of like big data type analyses on this sort of advertising, and you know, maybe there's some clever techniques that can be used to look at, see if they have any effect on people over time. Yeah, this is the thing with gambling research. There's so much happening, it's so much changing so quickly. We can only just do a small fraction compared in terms of research, because research is such a slow moving thing. It's completely horrendous on one side, but on the other side, you know, at least I'm not going to run out of stuff to research anytime soon.
Thank you. That was very interesting.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think we have time for another question if anyone has anything. Okay. Oh, yeah, Simon.
Very quick one. I was just interested when you said that the gambling counsellors didn't like a lot of the messages. What's their take on it? What would they prefer to see?
Yeah, so I think some of our like candidate messages were a bit close to the smoking, like gambling is harmful kind of thing. And actually what they wanted was sort of like, they thought that that sort of like strong stuff would lead to more like shame and avoidance, and you know, they pattern of this sort of solitary behavior and people aren't seeking help. So they wanted to focus on positive emotional messages about, you know, what could happen if, you know, you do start to change. Now, the thing is, the types of people that they see in their clinics are like a very small percentage of people. They see the people who are generally being harmed the most. The trouble is you've got this huge distribution of people who have like got some risk of harm, but you know, they're much less established. There's a sort of counter argument that messaging is quite a light touch thing, and it's something that a lot of people see. So you should focus on messages for that lower risk population, for which, you know, maybe other things would be different because, you know, they're quite not on these dire straits. And so, yeah, maybe like slightly like less intense stuff is the way to go. So many open questions and we really don't know. I have definitely struggled at times with messaging type interventions that will work. I've got some based on sort of information, so like telling people stuff about like the underlying statistics of the gambling game. Had some success in improving around real world status quo there. But yeah, in general, it's very hard with this light touch kind of stuff. And I'm sort of moving my focus a little bit because when I research one area too much, I get a bit bored, and yeah, I try to avoid boring myself in my own work. That's key aspects of my research philosophy.
That makes a lot of sense. Thanks very much.
Yeah, and thank you for this talk. And yeah, we'll be seeing you in campus.
Yeah, no worries, guys. Yeah, I've been a little bit busy lately, but yeah, definitely hope to make it to more of these in the near future. And yeah, it was a lot of fun. Great to talk to you all, and see you again soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.